Close your eyes for a second. I want you to think about the last time you felt genuinely stuck, not mildly inconvenienced stuck. The kind of stuck where you wake up in the morning and before your feet even hit the floor, the weight of everything is already sitting on your chest. The kind where you look at your own life like a stranger looking through a window, watching someone else live out the version of existence you never quite managed to escape into. The kind where you smile in public and perform fine, perform okay, perform I'm good, and then go home to the silence and feel the truth of how far you are from where you always believed you were supposed to be. You know that feeling. I know you do. Because if you didn't, you wouldn't still be watching. Now, I want you to think about something else. Think about every reason you have been given or given yourself for why things are the way they are. Think about the list. Because you have a list. Everybody has a list. The family that didn't support you. The opportunities that never showed up. The system that was tilted before you even stepped up to play. The wrong timing, the wrong city, the wrong circumstances, the wrong hand dealt to you by a game you never agreed to enter. The people who left, the people who stayed and made everything harder, the betrayals, the setbacks, the doors that closed so many times you eventually stopped knocking. That list feels real. That list feels like evidence. That list feels like the logical, reasonable, completely justified explanation for the distance between who you are and who you know, deep in the place where you are, most honest with yourself you were always meant to become. But what if I told you that list is the problem? Not the things on it, not the pain behind it, not the legitimacy of what you went through, because some of what you went through was genuinely brutal, and I will never minimize that. But the list itself, the act of keeping it, the daily ritual of returning to it, the identity you have quietly, gradually, almost invisibly built around it. What if the single most dangerous thing in your life right now is not your circumstances, but your relationship with your own story about your circumstances? What you are about to hear over the next few minutes is not comfortable. It is not designed to make you feel good about where you are. It is designed, Ned, to crack something, open something that has been sealed shut by years of rehearsed narrative and protected pain. And if you let it, if you stay with it all the way to the end instead of clicking away the moment it starts to cost you something emotionally, it will change the conversation you have with yourself permanently. The question is not whether you have been through hard things. The question is whether you are willing to stop letting the hard things be your answer for everything. Stay with me. This is for you. Asterisk, asterisk, ownership is the beginning of power. Asterisk, asterisk, let that sink in for a moment. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for something outside of themselves to change before they decide to move. They wait for the economy to get better. They wait for the right person to give them a chance. They wait for their family to understand them, for the neighborhood to change, for the boss to finally recognize their worth. And while they're waiting, life is passing. Days become weeks, weeks become years, and before they know it, a decade has slipped through their fingers and they're standing in the exact same place, still pointing at the same reasons, still reciting the same excuses. Here is the brutal truth. Nobody wants to say out loud the moment you hand responsibility for your life to someone else, you hand them your power along with it. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot say they ruin my chances and also believe you control your future. Those two things cannot exist in the same mind at the same time. One of them has to go. And if you want to build anything at all worth having, it has to be the blame. Blame feels justified. That is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Because sometimes the blame is legitimate. Sometimes people really did wrong you. Sometimes the system really was stacked against you. Sometimes the person who was supposed to protect you failed you completely. There are real injustices in this world, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But here is the distinction that changes everything, the distinction between what happened to you and what you do with it. Justice and progress are two different conversations. You can be right about who wronged you and still be the only one who can get yourself out. The world does not owe you a rescue simply because it handed you a wound. Think about the people you go and genuinely admire, not the ones who had everything handed to them. Those stories don't move you and you know it. The ones that stop you in your tracks are the ones who had every reason to fold and didn't. The ones who came from nothing, who were told they were nothing, who had the odds laughing in their face and still showed up, still worked, still believed. What separated them from everyone else who started in the same place? It was not luck. It was not talent alone. It was a decision. A quiet, fierce, unshakable decision that said, I am responsible for what comes next. Not them, me. That decision is the beginning of power, because power, real power, is not about what you control around you. It is about what you control within you. The second you accept ownership of your life, your choices, your habits, your attitude, your response to every single thing that happens, you become dangerous in the best possible way. You stop being a leaf in the wind and start being the wind itself. Nobody can take that from you. No circumstance, no person, no failure, no setback can reach inside you and remove a decision you have genuinely made in your soul. Now understand, this ownership is not about self-blame in a destructive sense. It is not about beating yourself up for every mistake or carrying the weight of past failures like a ball and chain around your ankle. That is not ownership. That is just a different kind of victimhood, a more private, internal one. True ownership is forward-facing. It asks not, why did this happen to me, but what am I going to do about it? It is ruthlessly practical. It is allergic to self-pity. It looks at every situation, no matter how unfair, and asks, given where I am right now, what is my next move? That shift in question is everything. Because the question, why did this happen to me, has no useful answer. Even if you find the answer, it doesn't move you an inch forward. It just confirms your suffering. But what is my next move? That question has infinite answers. That question is alive. That question opens doors in your mind that blame had permanently sealed shut. People who live in ownership are not people who never struggle. They are not people who never struggle. They are not people who never feel frustrated, hurt, or exhausted. They feel all of it, but they refuse to set up camp there. They process and then they pivot. They grieve and then they get back to work. They acknowledge the pain without giving it a throne in their life. That is the discipline. That is what looks like strength from the outside, not the absence of difficulty, but the refusal to let difficulty become identity. You have to ask yourself, what identity am I carrying right now? Because what you identify with is what you will protect. If you identify as someone who has been dealt a bad hand, you will protect that story. You will find evidence for it everywhere you look. You will unconsciously turn down opportunities because they don't fit the narrative of someone who never catches a break. The mind is that powerful. It will build the reality that matches the story you keep telling it. So if the story is, I am someone who owns my life, who takes full responsibility, who finds a way regardless, it will start building that reality instead. Not instantly, not without struggle, but steadily, relentlessly, undeniably. This is why ownership is not just a mindset trick or a motivational concept. It is the foundation of everything. Discipline is built on it. Resilience is built on it. Every skill, every achievement, every relationship worth having is built on the bedrock. CK of a person who said, this is my life and I'm accountable for it. Nothing gets built on blame. Nothing lasting, nothing real, nothing that you can look at with pride has ever been constructed on a foundation of excuses. So take it back. Take back the power you have been handing out to your past, to other people, to circumstances beyond your control. Own where you are. Own what you've done and what you haven't done. Own your next step. Because the life you want is not waiting for fairness. It is waiting for you to finally decide that you are the only one who is going to make it happen. Pain is a teacher, not a sentence. Asterisk, asterisk, read that again slowly and let it land somewhere deep. Every single person sitting in this room has been through something. Every one of you carries a story that has chapters you would never read aloud in public. Chapters filled with loss, with betrayal, with nights that felt like they would never end, with mornings you had to drag yourself through because the weight of everything was almost too much to carry. You know what that feels like? The kind of pain that doesn't just hurt your body, it reorganizes your entire sense of who you are and what the W world is. That kind of pain is real and it is serious and it deserves to be acknowledged. But here is where most people get it catastrophically wrong. They experience that pain and they make a permanent decision based on a temporary condition. They decide, consciously or not, that the pain is the final word, that it is a verdict rather than a lesson, that it defines the ceiling of what they are allowed to become. And from that moment forward, every new opportunity gets filtered through the wound. Every new relationship gets poisoned by the old betrayal. Every new attempt gets sabotaged by the memory of the last failure. The pain, instead of being processed and converted, gets installed as a permanent resident in the house of their identity. That is the sentence. Not the pain itself, but the decision to let the pain be the last thing that speaks. Think about what a teacher actually does. A good teacher does not make your life comfortable. A good teacher challenges you, pushes you past what you thought was your limit, forces you to confront what you don't know, and sometimes makes you feel completely inadequate in the process. Learning is uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable. Every meaningful transformation a human being goes through involves a period where everything feels harder before it feels easier. That is not punishment. That is curriculum. Your hardest seasons were your most intensive classrooms. The relationship that destroyed you taught you something about your own worth that comfort never could have. The job you lost forced you to discover a resilience and a resourcefulness you didn't know you had. The person who walked away showed you that you could survive abandonment and not just survive it, but rebuild from it. The poverty, the rejection, the illness, the grief, every single one of those experiences was depositing something into you, something that people who never went through it simply do not have access to. The question is never whether the pain happened. It did. The question is what you extract from it. Because pain without extraction is just suffering. But pain with extraction becomes wisdom, becomes empathy, becomes the kind of depth that makes certain people magnetic and unbreakable in a way that cannot be manufactured. You cannot fake having been through something real. And the people who have gone through real things come out the other side with their spirit intact. Those people carry a gravity that commands rooms without trying. But you have to do the work of extraction. It does not happen automatically. Just going through hard things does not make you wise. It can just as easily make you bitter, closed, paranoid, or self-destructive. The difference between the person who comes out of pain stronger and the person who comes out of pain stronger and the person who comes out of it broken is not the intensity of the pain. It is what they decided to do with the experience. One person asked, "What did this teach me?" The other person asked, "Why did this happen to me?" Same pain, two completely different destinations. You have to be intentional about mining your suffering for meaning. That sounds almost cruel when you are in the middle of it, and there is a time for grief that should not be rushed. But eventually, you have to sit across from your own pain and say, "I am not going to let you have been for nothing. I refuse to have gone through all of that and come out the other side empty-handed. What did you leave me? What am I now because of you that I could not have been without you?" Compassion is one of those things. People with, I have truly suffered from a different quality of compassion for others who are suffering. It is not theoretical for them. It is visceral, immediate, and real. That is a gift your pain gave you. Perseverance is another. You already know you can survive hard things because hard things have already tried to stop you and failed. Every time you are still standing is evidence that you are more durable than your worst days suggested. That knowledge, that bone deep knowledge, is something nobody can teach you in a classroom or give you in a book. It is earned only through experience. The sentence version of pain says this is as far as you go. The teacher version says this is where your real education begins. And the beautiful, almost unfair irony is that the people who have been through the most, who have the longest list of reasons to be defeated, often become the most unstoppable. Not despite what they went through, because of it. Because they have been tested at a level that most people never reach, and they know in a way that is cellular and unshakable that they do not break. You do not know what you are truly made of until you have been genuinely tested. And if you are still here, if you are still breathing and still trying and still in this fight, then the test already gave you its answer. So stop apologizing for your pain. Stop being ashamed of the hard road you walked. Stop treating your scars like they are something to hide. They are not evidence of damage. They are evidence of survival. They are proof that life hit you with something real and you are still here. That is not weakness dressed up in a story. That is the actual foundation of strength. Your pain was never a punishment. It was always preparation. The only question left is what you are being prepared for and whether you are willing to step into it. Asterisk, asterisk, your story does not define your destiny. Asterisk, asterisk, say it out loud if you have to, because some of you need to hear it in your own voice. There is something deeply human about the stories we tell ourselves. From the time we are children, we begin constructing a narrative about who we are, where we belong, and what we are capable of. Those early stories are built from the raw material of our environment, the words of parents, the opinions of teachers, the economic reality of the household we grew up in, the neighborhood we walked through, yesterday, the expectations spoken and unspoken of everyone around us. And for most people, those stories get locked in early. They calcify. They become not just a description of where you came from, but a prescription for where you are allowed to go. That is the trap. And millions of people live inside it their entire lives without ever realizing the walls are made of nothing more than repeated thought. Here is what a story actually is. It is an interpretation. It is not fact. It is not law. It is not destiny written in stone by some cosmic authority who decided your ceiling before you were born. A story is simply the meaning you chose to attach to the events of your life. And meaning, unlike the events themselves, is always within your power to revise. The event is fixed. The interpretation is not. What happened to you is done. What it means for your future is still entirely up for negotiation. Think about two people who grow up in identical circumstances. Same neighborhood, same schools, same broken homes, same poverty, same limited access to resources and opportunity. One of them looks at that environment and says, this is proof that people like me don't make it. The other looks at the exact same environment and says, this is exactly the reason I have to. Same story, completely opposite conclusions. And those conclusions will produce completely different lives. Not because the world treated them differently, but because they decided the story meant something different. That decision, quiet as it is, becomes the most powerful force in the trajectory of a human life. You have to understand what you are actually doing when you let your past define your future. You are taking something that is already over something that cannot be changed, something that exists only in memory, and you are giving it authority over something that hasn't happened yet. You are allowing the dead past to govern the living future. That is perhaps the most expensive trade a person can make. You are spending tomorrow's possibilities on yesterday's pain, and you are getting absolutely nothing in return. The story of where you came from has value, but only as context, never as conclusion. It is a chapter, not the whole book. And the most important thing about chapters is that they end. The circumstances of your childhood end. The failures of your early adulthood end. The relationships that broke you end, the financial struggles end, or they can, if you refuse to let the story of lack become the story you keep writing. Every single season of your life has an expiration date, but only if you are willing to turn the page. What most people do instead is dog-ear that painful chapter and return to it constantly. They read it over and over. They memorized the language of it. They recite it to new people they meet as a kind of introduction. Let me tell you what happened to me so you understand why I am the way I am. And while vulnerability and honesty about your history have their place, there is a version of that which is not healing, it is haunting. You are not processing the story anymore. You are performing it. You are keeping it alive because somewhere, consciously or not, you have decided that it explains you and therefore protects you from the risk of trying and failing at something new. Because here is the hidden function of a limiting story. It is a shield. If your story says you are not the kind of person who succeeds, then you never have to face the terror of genuinely going for something and falling short. The story protects the example. By eliminating the attempt, it is the most sophisticated form of self-sabotage that exists because it feels like self-awareness. It disguises itself as realism. It calls itself honesty, but it is fear dressed in a biography. Real honesty would admit that you do not actually know what you are capable of because you have never fully tried. Real honesty would acknowledge that the story you have been telling is based on evidence from a version of you that no longer exists, a younger, less experienced, less resilient version who had not yet developed the tools you have right now. You are not who you were when the hardest parts of your story were written. You have been changed by everything you survived. And that changed person deserves to be written into a new narrative, not crammed back into an old one that no longer fits. Destiny is not assigned at birth. It is not determined by zip code or last name or family history or the number of times you have already failed. Destiny is built brick by brick, decision by decision, day by people who refuse to accept that the opening chapters of their life constituted the final verdict. Every person who ever transformed their circumstances did so by first transforming the story they told about what was possible. The external change always follows the internal one. Always. So the work is not out there. The work is in here. It is in the narrative you wake up with every morning. It is in the inner monologue that runs underneath everything you do. It is in what you believe truly privately in the quiet of your own mind about who you are and what you deserve and how far you are allowed to go. Change that story, not with blind optimism or hollow affirmation, but with a ruthless, evidence-based insistence that where you started is not where you have to stop. Because the only version of your story that truly matters is the one you are still writing right now. Hunger must be greater than hurt. Asterisk, asterisk, not louder for a moment, not stronger on a good day. Greater consistently, relentlessly, every single day, regardless of how you feel. This is the one nobody wants to talk about because it is the hardest one. The first three keynotes deal with mindset, with how you think about responsibility, about pain, about your story. And mindset matters enormously. But mindset without fuel is an engine without gasoline. You can have the most corrected, most liberated, most forward-facing perspective in the world, and if the hunger is not there, if the burning, gnawing, obsessive desire to build something is not alive inside you, then the perspective will not hold when life gets genuinely difficult. And life will get genuinely difficult. That is not pessimism. That is just the contract. Motivation is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the conversation around success and personal transformation. People treat it like a resource that either exists or it doesn't, like you either woke up motivated or you didn't. And if you didn't, you wait until you do. They chase the feeling of motivation through speeches, through music, through videos, through anything that produces that temporary electrical surge of I can do this, and there is nothing wrong with using those tools. But if motivation is all you have, you are in serious trouble because motivation is entirely weather dependent. It changes with your mood, your energy, your circumstances, and the last conversation you had. It is the most unreliable engine you could possibly build your future on. Hunger is different. Hunger is not a feeling, it is a state of being. It is not something that visits you when conditions are right. It is something that lives in you, that does not require the right song or the right speech or the right morning to activate. Hunger is what gets you up when the alarm goes off and every cell in your body is asking for 5 more minutes. Hunger is what keeps you at the work long after the initial excitement has evaporated. And what remains is just the grind, the repetition, the unglamorous daily execution of things that may not produce visible results for months. Hunger does not need applause. Hunger does not need validation. Hunger feeds itself on vision, on the clarity of what you are building and why it cannot wait. But here is the crucial distinction this keynote is making, and it is the one that separates the people who eventually break through from the people who stay perpetually on the edge of their breakthrough without ever crossing it. It is not just about having hunger. It is about hunger being greater than hurt. Because hurt is also persistent. Hurt also shows up every day. Hurt has its own alarm clock, and it goes off reliably in the form of exhaustion, in the form of rejection, in tea. The form of comparison when you look at where someone else is and measure it against where you are. Hurt shows up as discouragement after the pitch that didn't land, the application that was rejected, the person who didn't believe in you, the plan that fell apart after you had invested everything into it. Hurt is loyal. It will never stop showing up. The question is never whether it will come. It is whether what is pulling you forward is stronger than what is trying to pull you back. Think about what it means to be genuinely hungry in the physical sense. When a person is truly hungry, not mildly peckish, but deeply, urgently hungry, they do not wait for a perfect meal. They do not hold out for the ideal circumstances before they eat. They find food. They are creative, resourceful, unstoppable in their pursuit of what they need because the need is so acute that comfort and preference become secondary. That is the quality of hunger being described here. Not a polite ambition that operates within comfortable parameters. A driving, consuming, non-negotiable need to build the life you can see inside your mind, a need so strong that the obstacles become logistical rather than philosophical. Physical. You are not asking whether to push through. You are only asking how. The people who have hurt the most and still built the most are not superhuman. They did not have access to reserves of willpower that ordinary people lack. What they had was a why that was bigger than their wounds. They had a vision, a purpose, a person they were fighting for, a version of themselves they refused to abandon. That made the cost of stopping higher than the cost of continuing. When the hunger is that deep, the hurt becomes almost irrelevant, not because it disappears, but because it simply cannot compete. You feel it and you move anyway. You acknowledge it and you work anyway. You are tired and broken and uncertain and you show up anyway. Because the alternative, standing still, giving up, letting the hurt win, is simply not a price you are willing to pay. This is also why clarity of purpose is not a luxury. It is survival equipment. Vague ambition produces vague hunger. If you only sort of know what you want, you will only sort of fight for it. But when your purpose is specific, when it is personal, when it is connected to something that genuinely matters to you at the deepest level T, then the hunger has a target. It knows what it is feeding. It knows what it is building. And that specificity turns ordinary effort into extraordinary persistence. You are allowed to be hurt. You have earned that hurt through real experiences that cost you real things. Nobody is asking you to pretend it doesn't exist or to perform a happiness you don't feel. But you are not allowed, you cannot afford to let the hurt sit in the driver's seat. Feel it in the passenger seat if you must. Acknowledge it. But keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on where you are going. Because the life you want does not care how you feel today. It only responds to what you do today. And what you do today is determined entirely by what is louder inside you, the voice of the hurt or the roar of the hunger. Make sure it is the hunger. Every single time you made it this far. And that already tells me something about you. Because most people would have tuned out. Most people would have scrolled past, clicked away, found something easier to consume, something that asked nothing of them. But you stayed. And I need you to understand that the fact that you stayed is not an accident, it is evidence of the very hunger we just spent this entire time talking about. Something in you recognizes itself in these words. Something in you lean forward instead of leaning back. Hold on to that feeling because it is rare and it is yours and it is the beginning of everything. So let me bring it home. We talked about ownership, about the terrifying, liberating truth that your life belongs to you completely, and that the moment you stop outsourcing the blame is the moment you reclaim the power to change everything. We talked about pain, about how everything that broke you was simultaneously building you, and how the difference between a wound and a weapon is simply the decision you make about what your suffering was for. We talked about story, about how the narrative you inherited from your past is not a life sentence. How the chapters behind you do not write the chapters ahead of you. And how the most important words you will ever change are the ones you speak silently to yourself in the dark. And we talked about hunger, about how motivation fades, but hunger endures, about how the fire inside you must burn louder than every voice that ever told you to stop, sit down, and accept Leah. Saying than what you were built for. 4 keynotes, 1 message. You are not a victim of your life. You are the architect of it. But here is what I want to leave you with, and this is the part I need you to carry out of here today. Transformation does not happen in the moment of inspiration. It happens in the moment after the moment, when the speech ends, when the screen goes dark, when the music stops and the silence comes back, and it is just you and your choices and the life you have been given to live. That moment is where everything is decided. Not here, there. What will you do in that moment? Will you close this video and return to the same patterns, the same excuses, the same comfortable narrative of why it hasn't happened yet for you? Or will you carry something different this time, a decision, small but unbreakable, that today is the day the victim inside you stops running the show? I cannot make that choice for you. Nobody can. But I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The version of you that is possible on the other side of that choice is worth every uncomfortable, difficult, terrifying step it takes to get there. You did not come this far to only come this far, to only come this far. Now go. And do not waste a single day of the life you made it this far. And that already tells me something about you. Because most people would have tuned out. Most people would have scrolled past, clicked away, found something easier to consume, something that asked nothing of them. But you stayed. And I need you to understand that the fact that you stayed is not an accident. It is evidence of the very hunger we just spent this entire time talking about. Something in you recognized itself in these words. Something in you leaned forward instead of leaning back. Hold on to that feeling, because it is rare and it is yours and it is the beginning of everything. So let me bring it home. We talked about ownership, about the terrifying, liberating truth that your life belongs to you completely. And at the moment you stop outsourcing the blame is the moment you reclaim the power to change everything. We talked about pain, about how everything that broke you was simultaneously building you, and how the difference between a wound and a weapon is simply the decision you make about what your suffering was for. We talked about story about how the narrative you inherited from yours. Your past is not a life sentence. How the chapters behind you do not write the chapters ahead of you, and how the most important words you will ever change are the ones you speak silently to yourself in the dark. And we talked about hunger, about how motivation fades, but hunger endures, about how the fire inside you must burn louder than every voice that ever told you to stop, sit down, and accept less than what you were built for. 4 keynotes, 1 message. You are not a victim of your life. You are the architect of it. But here is what I want to leave you with, and this is the part I need you to carry out of here today. Transformation does not happen in the moment of inspiration. It happens in the moment after the moment, when the speech ends, when the screen goes dark, when the music stops and the silence comes back, and it is just you and your choices and the life you have been given to live. That moment is where everything is decided. Not here, there. What will you do in that moment? Will you close this video and return to the same patterns, the same excuses, the same comfortable narrative of why it hasn't happened yet for you? Or will you carry something different this time? A decision, small but unbreakable, that today is the day the victim inside you stops running the show. I cannot make that choice for you. Nobody can. But I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The version of you that is possible on the other side of that choice is worth every uncomfortable, difficult, terrifying step it takes to get there. You did not come this far to only come this far. Now go, and do not waste a single day of the life that is still waiting for you to claim it.